Hello, I'm Lisa Phillips, and today's video blog is low prices don't spell war zone, they spell opportunity. And I'm going to go over the fact that just because the housing price is low doesn't mean that it's a war zone or that you should be scared to invest in that neighborhood. So we all know the cheaper that you can find your house is better all around for your real estate investment portfolio. It means A, more cash flow, B, less turnaround time. You'll own your property sooner, and I'm talking 3 to 4 years versus 10 to 15 years on a more expensive property. And 3, it's just easier for you to fit it in your budget on the fix-up and repairs. But some people equate a low-priced house with a war zone. And I particularly advocate people looking at properties under $30,000. Why do I do that? Because I can, and I found out once I got on the ground and looked, they're not that bad, and neither are the neighborhoods. So you got to understand, the reason that a housing price is low doesn't mean because there's drug dealers outside or it's a war zone. First of all, one reason for the housing prices being low is that money hasn't reached it yet. Money follows money. So if downtown is the place that they've chosen to revitalize, if downtown is the place geographically that everyone wants to put their money in, well, that just means they haven't gotten to these other places. Money will follow money in the downtown area, and then eventually it spreads itself out to different pockets where it makes sense geographically. So it might be first the downtown area, but then it might be off the stretch of highway that has really good transportation access. You know, there's geographical indicators of where they're going to go next. And I have to tell you, there's a couple of my properties that were just solid working class neighborhoods that eventually I'm hearing there's revitalization efforts in the neighborhood and that condos are going to be built. Now, that's not why I purchased the property. It was just a solid performing property under $30,000, but money will eventually catch up to the other places where it can go. You know, this market's tapped out. Everything's too expensive for an investor to get a return on investment. Well, then they start looking at the next logical place to put their money. Not everyone has a ton of money where they can put everywhere at once. It sort of follows the money and then it finds a new spot. And if you're like me, where everyone's over here, I'm right here. Because A, it's going to work for me regardless if they come over here and force that appreciation. But B, if they do look around for good neighborhoods that are easy to invest in, there you go. Low cost, solid, low crime, and that's it. And there's one more reason I've noticed since I've been doing this in the last 4 years about why prices are depressed in certain neighborhoods. Like I said, it doesn't have to do with the crime. It has more to do with the fact that it's old. So if there's new houses being developed or new condos being developed and the money is over there, you know, people who are new to town with fresh money coming in, they're not necessarily going to an old neighborhood. I mean, would you? I mean, that's not my first thought. I mean, it's my first thought for home ownership and real estate investing. But if I'm just here to rent and live, my first thought isn't to go to that old neighborhood. So all of a sudden you have these homes that are built in the 1950s and 40s and they're not like 1980 or even 2000s and aughts and on. Well, they're getting the new rush of money. And so that means the prices here are just low to entice people to go to an old house where no investment and money has been put into it. So the fact that a lot of people aren't going there keeps that price low. I mean, it's a market, supply and demand. If no one's demanding it because they want the newer stuff, well, the newer prices are going to go up and the things over here are just going to stay at that lower price. And there's also another thing to keep in mind. You know, I've invested in different parts of the country, so I've noticed that there is a difference depending if it's an inner city or an urban geography versus a mid-sized city. You know, if it's a mid-sized city with 100 to 200,000 people, you know, a neighborhood with $30,000 properties isn't the same neighborhood as if I went into a big city like Baltimore and they had $30,000 properties. So in Baltimore, you have a city, you have limited geography, and you know, you have people on top of each other. So you can get a row home, but there's tons of people. It breeds a different dynamic and a different lifestyle. But you know, in a mid-sized city with enough land, well, everyone has a yard. You know, I live in the DC area and I get nothing except a balcony. And even then, I don't have a balcony. I can go to my rooftop, but other people do have it. And you know, I don't get that luxury. But then I go to a mid-sized city and I purchase a property for $25,600 in Richmond, and the neighborhood's perfect, and it's you know, old, you know, 1940s home, smaller, But smaller doesn't mean bad. It just means it's smaller and there's somebody perfectly willing to rent it out. And they each get their yards and it's different dynamic. People aren't on top of each other. So it's like a different feel to that environment. But it's also a reason why you can't assume because a house is a depressed price or is lower price that it's automatically a war zone. There's so many factors that go into play on whether or not you should be comfortable. And I don't know, maybe it was the fact that I grew up in a working class neighborhood. So my neighborhood was a neighborhood where the houses cost $30,000 growing up. It was a neighborhood where immigrants came over and in Las Vegas, and immigrants from Mexico mostly came over, and they were purchasing in my neighborhood because that's what you could afford, you know? It was the cheap neighborhood. It was where people were administrative assistants and were secretaries and worked in the coupon packing plant like my neighbor did across the street, or were laborers. But, you know, it was a solid neighborhood and there was not one lick of crime. Never got my bike stolen and we left it in the front yard like every day. You know, I never had gotten a fight. You know, there was no like gang activities. And so you have like, so I knew that there's working class neighborhoods in this price range where it is solid middle class people. Everyone I knew who grew up from that neighborhood, they either went to college or they have jobs themselves taking care of their new family. So, I mean, solid values, solid people. So maybe it's because I grew up in it that I knew that you just have to go and look and see exactly what's going on with that property. But just because it spells low price doesn't mean that it's a bad area. And it's probably because I grew up in it that I knew that, no, this neighborhood's perfectly fine. And people went on to be directors and CEOs, run their own blogs. You know, so you can't assume that just because of the price. And honestly, if you want to know what a war zone is, this is how you really know what a war zone is. Look at the crime reports. If you look at the crime reports, which are all online, so when I'm looking for a house, I have the crime stats report for that particular city on. And you put in that address, if you see a ton of crime, that's a war zone. If you see a $30,000 property and it has no crime on that block, then that's a solid neighborhood. And honestly, that is the biggest divider between working class and war zone. So I don't like when people use the word war zones, because I'm like, just because a property is working class or a neighborhood's working class, it doesn't mean that there's excessive violence or drug activity or anything that you should be wary of. But that's my biggest divider. So if you're looking for areas in this looking for properties in these areas, you know, that's what you should be concerned about more so than anything. What are the crime stats saying? You know, and then that'll give you the best story, not the price. There's tons of reason why I find houses under $30,000 because of foreclosures, the other ones I mentioned, but it doesn't mean anything about it being bad. And what's funny is that it's so wide open for people to come in and invest, and there's so many. And, you know, I got to tell you a story, you know, in Vegas, you know, when there was a new hotel and casino that was built, everyone got so excited because for us living in Las Vegas, you're like, oh my gosh, you know, that's 12,000 new jobs. This is a new building. This is new. Tourists are going to come. So many people are going to be excited over this. We would get excited. And I have to tell you, when I go in these working class neighborhoods and invest, you know, all of a sudden you're that person that makes the neighborhood excited to be there and excited to work there. And don't underestimate that sense of pride that you left an impact on a solid working class neighborhood that you can be proud of. So what I want you to get from this is, don't assume because a house has a depressed price or is under $30,000 or is low price that it's a terrible house, or that you'll have nothing but bad tenants and that you would have bad crime. You could check the crime reports on the internet. You can look at see what rents are before you even go there with a few websites. And, you know, your money goes a lot further in these areas, and the return on investment is so much faster and quicker that it's amazing. So don't overlook it. Real estate is a really big game, and we have so many parts that we can play in this. Thank you. This is Lisa Phillips signing in, blogging for Bigger Pockets. Thank you so much.